Okay, so your guys' homework that should have been due today, especially for online classes. Online classes was due yesterday. In-person classes, it was due today. Was to create a list of what you believe the Democratic and the Republican values to be, based off of what you've heard, what you think you know, or what you know you know. That was your homework. So hopefully you have done that. If not, get that in as soon as possible, because that is due today, basically. Today we're going to be talking about actually, I want to tell you guys this. This does have to do with government and elections. If you haven't heard, Texas is now joining the list of states who have lawsuits about the elections. It's there's a lot we could talk about with the elections, and there's a lot that I have in my personal opinions that I wish I could tell you guys, but I can't. But for the most part, I see a lot of hypocrisy from all sides. I see a lot of child play, meaning you did this, so can I. Why can't I do this because you did this? You know, I see a lot of that happening as well. So that's definitely, I think, is immature. Personally, I think it's immature. I feel like is what children do. Well, he did this, so why can't I do it? People need to take the high road, and if you know what I'm talking about, great. I mean, I'm mostly talking about what people are saying about Democrats and Republicans. Republicans saying, well, the Democrats didn't want to take Trump's election and just accept it, so that doesn't mean that I have to accept Biden's election, and so that's their child's attitude there. And Democrats are also just displaying childlike attributes by saying, well, the Republicans said that we should just get over it, so they should just get over it. You know, they're doing both the same thing. And you guys will find over the years that the political parties, no matter who they are very political parties are very hypocritical. They will support something when it's in their favor. And that's just a human nature, though. It's not anything bad about the political parties in general. It's just human nature to support things when it goes your way and to not support things when it doesn't benefit you. So, all right, we got Reese with us too, and Tevin and Keelan. Awesome. We've got a good chunk of people online with us today. Yay! All right, so today's topic is on political parties. Yay! This is like some of you guys' favorite topics, I know. First thing that we're going to be doing in talking about the political parties is I want to show you guys a couple videos. These will go into the history of the two popular political parties today, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. So this is going to show you kind of how things have evolved since the 1800s, when they first started becoming powerful political parties. Democratic Party was established first. The Republican Party was established basically about the Civil War time. So yeah, without further ado, we're going to watch it. If you have any technical video, audio issues, make sure to send me a message in the chat so I know. So I'm going to show you guys first how the Democratic Party has evolved. Not this one. Whoa. Where did my screen go? Nope. 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 This might be it. Nope. Where'd it go? There it is. It's not showing me. Oh. Hang on. Sorry, guys. Okay, it's still not working. What the heck? All right. We'll open it up again.
I can't see the video.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
We can hear it, but we can't see it.
Okay, so let's try again. Yep, thank you. Let's try it again.
Today's Democratic Party believes that government has an important role to play in society. It fights against economic inequality. It advocates policies that battle racial and gender discrimination. But it wasn't always this way. The Democratic Party was once the party of white supremacy, supporting slavery and the Ku Klux Klan. To understand how the party made such a huge shift, you have to go back to its origins in the mid-1820s, when it sprung up supporting the presidential candidacy of a popular former general, Andrew Jackson. Jackson was an outsider, challenging the political establishment and the elites of his day, and his critics disparaged him as a jackass. But Jackson embraced the animal as a symbol of determination, and donkeys started appearing in newspapers to represent him and his followers. In the 1828 presidential election, which saw record-breaking popular participation, Jackson won in a landslide victory. So his supporters argued that they, and not the old elites, represented the popular will of the country, and they started calling themselves the Democratic Party. Jackson's administration immediately began expelling Native Americans living east of the Mississippi River, an issue that defined the new administration. After he signed the Indian Removal Act into law in 1830, 5 large tribes were rounded up and forcibly marched into territories and camps further west. And the Democrats' ambitions didn't stop there. In the 1840s, the party adopted the doctrine of manifest destiny, the idea that Americans, white Americans, were divinely entitled to dominate the whole North American continent. Democratic President James K. Polk put this idea into action, massively expanding U.S. holdings by annexing Texas, acquiring Oregon, and winning much of what's now the southwestern U.S. in a war with Mexico. But soon afterward, national politics devolved into bitter controversy over whether new states entering the Union should be permitted to allow slavery. Democrats said they should, since their support base was strongest in slaveholding states. Yet a new Northern party, the Republicans, sprang up in opposition to expanding slavery any further. When Republican Abraham Lincoln won the presidency, the South seceded and the Civil War began. Once the Civil War was over, the Republican Party was bitterly unpopular among white Southerners who wanted to maintain supremacy over former slaves. So the Democratic Party promised to limit federal government intervention on behalf of Black citizens. Democrats became effectively the only political party in the South, aided by intimidation and suppression of Black voters. Democrats also won on state and local levels, leading to the constant abuse of the rights of Black citizens. As the 20th century began, the country was changing, and the Democratic Party was changing too. A handful of individuals and corporations had grown enormously rich and powerful, using their vast fortunes to influence politics. And as a reaction to this, some reformers began pushing an agenda of progressivism, arguing that the government should take more of a role in regulating big businesses and improving ordinary people's lives. At first, these progressive reformers were present in both parties. But it was Democrat Woodrow Wilson who won the presidency in 1912 and put much of this agenda into action over Republican resistance. So the Democratic Party became the main home for progressives, and the Republican Party became more the party of business. But it was the Great Depression of the 1930s that sealed the Democratic Party's new identity as the party of government activism. In an effort to combat the crippling economic situation, President Franklin Roosevelt signed what was then the largest package of domestic government projects in American history, calling it the New Deal. And in the process of doing this, his administration dramatically expanded the size of government. Yet the party was still split over race. By the mid-20th century, it contained Southerners who staunchly supported segregation, liberal reformers trying to end it, and many politicians who were just happy to look the other way. But in 1964, when the Senate voted on the Anti-Segregation Civil Rights Act, this shows how the progressive reformers in the party had gained the upper hand, steering the party away from its racist past towards equality and social justice. But the Democrats in the South voted against the Civil Rights Act, remaining wedded to the idea of segregation. This chart shows the presidential vote for Black voters. Around the 1960s, Black voters who had already been moving towards the Democratic Party would begin overwhelmingly supporting the Democrats from then on. And conversely, the Republicans would take a huge hit among Black voters. Meanwhile, white Southerners moved away from the Democratic Party they had been loyal to for so long, in part because of race, but also because of a suspicion of big government and a desire to defend traditional values against liberal activists. Democrats would go from dominating the South to losing almost all influence in the region. Thanks in part to this drop in popularity among white voters, Democrats started losing elections, often losing by huge margins. But demographically, the US is becoming an increasingly non-white country, and the Democrats have had a comeback thanks in part to minority voters. The huge influx of Hispanic voters has especially benefited Democrats. These demographic shifts helped the Democratic Party, once the advocates of white supremacy and slavery, to elect the first Black president in 2008, showing just how much the party had changed over the years. Yet it's not entirely clear where the future of the Democratic Party will lie. But as America becomes more diverse, it's likely that the Democratic Party's appeal among minorities will continue to be its strength into the future.
Okay. So I wanted to chat with you guys for a minute about about the history of the Democratic Party. Just unmute or chat in there for input. But do you guys think that the Democratic Party has always remained the same party with the same values, or do you think that it has changed over time? Yes, exactly. Thank you. It has definitely changed over time. Absolutely. There are certain things. I mean, the Democratic Party used to be the party of white supremacists. Like that was one of their main beliefs. Really, was they wanted to keep slavery. They didn't want to allow Blacks to have civil rights at all. They really resisted Reconstruction, where they're trying to bring Blacks into the free society. They really resisted that. So, and they did that until the Civil Rights era is when Democrats finally were starting to support that. And this was just 1960s. So, and today they fully denounce white supremacy. It's not part of their platform anymore. And they kind of go in the opposite way when they deal with Black and whites or different racial minorities. They will go in support of their individual rights, no matter what race they are. So it kind of seems like they flip-flopped, at least in some instances. Some instances they haven't, but in some they have. One thing to notice is in the South, that's where the Democratic stronghold used to be in the 1800s. That's where slavery was. During the Civil War, the Confederates, the Southern states, they were so against Lincoln's election because they knew that Lincoln would tell the states that they couldn't have slavery anymore. They knew that. And their big thing that they thought of, there was two main reasons why they fought that. One was because they were white supremacists and didn't feel like Blacks should be free. But the second thing, and this is the part I want to focus on, is they also believed that the federal government should not tell people how to run their business. They believe that states individually should decide if they should support slavery or not. They felt like it was a state right. And that is something that the South has always adamantly thought, both in the 1800s and still today. They believe that government should not just say, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. They feel like there's a lot of things that should be states' rights to be able to decide for themselves whether they should do something or not. So today, the Republican Party, and this kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but today the Republican Party is the party that backs the idea of we shouldn't just do everything because the federal government tells us to do it. States should be able to decide things for themselves, how they run their business, how they go on a day-to-day basis. That's a state power. And so that idea of no big government and yes to strong state power that has always been a Southern thing. They've always agreed with that. It used to be part of the Democratic Party. Today, it is part of the Republican Party to want to do that. Oh, I thought we lost someone, but maybe we didn't. Okay, so the next one I'm going to show you guys is how the Republican Party has evolved in history from its beginnings to where it's at today. Now, I will let you know, Vox, the channel that made these videos, I like how they made the Democratic one. I feel like that's fair. It's unbiased. It's factual based. The Republican one, I feel like they're missing some things that should be talked about in there. And I feel like they're a little biased against Republicans. But I'm still showing it to you guys because it talks about some key things that I want to discuss with you guys. And I haven't seen another video that just discusses it the way that this one does. So I'm going to have you guys watch that one next to see how the Republican Party has evolved over time. And then we'll get together and talk some more. So that's this one. We are not supporting that.
Today's Republican Party opposes big government. It's culturally conservative. Its demographic support is strongest among white voters, and it usually dominates elections in the South. The party's 2016 presidential nominee has been heavily criticized for inciting racial tensions. But things weren't always this way. Over the past 160 years or so, the party has undergone a remarkable transformation from the party of Abraham Lincoln to the party of Donald Trump. To understand how the GOP got this way, you have to go back to when it first came into existence in 1854, just 7 years before the Civil War. There are two parties at this point, the Whigs and the Democrats. America is quickly expanding westward, and there's an intense debate over whether or not new states should permit slavery. The Democratic Party, with strong support in the South, has become increasingly pro-slavery. But the Whigs are divided on the issue. Their northern supporters are really afraid that the growing number of slave states would have too much political influence, which they feared could really hurt free white workers economically. So in 1854, the country is debating whether or not the territories of Kansas and Nebraska should allow slavery. The Whigs can't agree, and the party ends up collapsing. The former Whigs in the North form a new party that will fight against letting slavery expand any further. They call it the Republican Party. By 1860, the Republican Party has become increasingly powerful in the North, enough so that a little-known Republican named Abraham Lincoln wins the presidency. Even though Lincoln promises he won't interfere with slavery in states that already have it, he and his party are still too anti-slavery for the South to tolerate. So 11 southern states secede from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America. The northern states decide to fight to keep the Union together, and the Civil War ensues. The result is a northern victory and the abolition of slavery nationwide. After the war, Republicans begin fighting to ensure that recently freed slaves in the South have their rights. A year after Lincoln's assassination, the party passes the Civil Rights Act of 1866. They fight to make sure that Black men have the same...
Do you guys see it?
Right to vote with new laws and constitutional amendments. But something had happened during the Civil War that began changing the young Republican Party. Government spending during the war made many northern businessmen really rich. Gradually, these wealthy financiers and industrialists start taking more and more of a leadership role in the Republican Party. They want to hold on to power, and they don't think that fighting for black rights in a mostly white country is the best way to do that. Meanwhile, the South is resisting these new racial reforms, often violently. And most white Republican voters and leaders now feel that they've done enough for black citizens in the South, and it's time to emphasize other issues. So in 1870, the party basically gives up on reforming the South, deciding instead to leave it to its own devices. The region becomes politically dominated by white Democrats. Fast forward to the new century. By the 1920s, the Republican Party has become essentially the party of big business. This works out quite well for them as the economy is booming, but not so well when the economy crashes in 1929 and the Great Depression begins. Franklin D. Roosevelt and other Democrats are swept into power and begin dramatically expanding the size and role of the federal government in an attempt to fight the Depression and better provide for Americans. Republicans oppose this rapid expansion, defining themselves as opposition to big government, an identity that the party still holds today. Going into the 50s and 60s, race and the South returned to the forefront of national politics, with the civil rights movement attempting to end segregation and ensure blacks truly have the right to vote. The civil rights debate isn't a purely partisan issue. It's more of a regional issue, with Northerners from both parties supporting it and Southerners from both parties opposing it. Then, in 1964, it's Democratic President Lyndon Johnson who signs the Civil Rights Act into law. And it's Republican presidential nominee Barry Goldwater who opposes it, arguing that it expands government power too much. A massive switch-up takes place. Black voters, some of whom had already been shifting from the Republican Party, convert almost entirely to their new advocates, the Democrats. The white voters in the South, who had been staunch Democrats, start to really resent the big government interference here and in other matters like abortion rights and school prayer. Over the next 3 decades, whites in the South switch to the GOP, which makes the South an overwhelmingly Republican region. By the 1980s, the party begins to resemble the GOP we are familiar with today. Republicans elect Ronald Reagan, who promises to fight for business interests, lower taxes, and traditional family values. As the 21st century begins, America is going through a major demographic shift in the form of Hispanic immigration, both legal and illegal. Democrats and business elites tend to support reforming immigration laws so that the over 10 million unauthorized immigrants in the US would get legal status. On the Republican side, tough on immigration policies and rhetoric became popular. But this ends up costing the Republicans when, in 2012, Mitt Romney loses his bid for the presidency. He gets blown out among Hispanic voters. Exit polls showed that 71% of them voted for Barack Obama. So the Republican Party starts to look more like a party for white voters in an increasingly non-white country. Given these demographic trends, Republican leaders worry that if they keep losing Hispanic voters by that much, they'll lose their chances of ever winning the presidency. So in 2013, some key Republicans in the Senate, including the rising star Marco Rubio, collaborate with Democrats on an immigration reform bill that would give unauthorized immigrants a path to legal status. But there's a huge backlash from the Republican Party's predominantly white base, which views the bill as amnesty for immigrants who broke the rules. This exacerbates the GOP voters' mistrust in their own party leaders, a mistrust that has already been growing for some time. And that makes the political landscape of 2015 fertile ground for a figure like Donald Trump, an outsider businessman who wants to build a wall on the border of Mexico. Trump isn't a traditional conservative, but he appealed to the resentment and the mistrust of party leaders that Republican primary voters had, as well as the strong opposition to growing immigration trends. And even though he was loathed by party leaders, he won enough support in the primaries to become the GOP nominee for president. So now, the Republican Party is once again at a major crossroads as it tries to meet the political challenges of the 21st century. It's up to Republican voters and leaders to decide just what they want their party to be.
Okay. All right. So the Republican Party, I'll ask you guys the same question as I did the Democratic Party. Has the Republican Party stayed the same or has it shifted over time? Yes, definitely shifty. Absolutely has shifted and changed over time, just like the Democratic Party has. It used to be the party, that supported individual rights and civil rights, where the Democrats were resisting it. They wanted to keep, white power. But then that has changed where they don't focus on individual rights anymore. They focus on individual liberties. And they are seen, now I'm not going to say at all because they are not a white supremacist political party. There are white supremacists within the Republican Party, but there's also white supremacists within the Democratic Party as well. So, that's an entirely different thing. But it is a fact that the majority of the Republican base is white. That is absolutely true. And so it kind of feels like the political party that basically defends civil rights or people's individual rights, it used to be the Republicans, and now it's more so the Democrats. And the party that used to support states' rights, or basically the state being able to determine for themselves what to do on issues, rather than the federal government just telling them what to do, used to be a Democratic thing, and now it's a Republican thing. So there are some things within the parties that have changed. There's some things that are still the same, like the Republican Party is still the party of business, helping businesses grow. They encourage that more than the Democrats do, both big and small businesses. So like there's some things that haven't changed, but there's a lot of things that have changed. And most of that was during the 1900s, the early 1900s. The big shift kind of felt like it changed at the time of the New Deal. Now, if you don't remember from last year, when we learned about the New Deal, was the Great Depression happened. People were they were really struggling financially. They were struggling with money because a lot of people were losing their jobs. They were losing money. Something similar in what we're dealing with today. Because I think today the pandemic today is basically the Great Depression was this bad with the economy. The pandemic is like right here, and then we've got other recessions with the economy down here. But like this is the next one, the next step, basically underneath the Great Depression, how bad that was. It's not as bad, but it's pretty bad. We'll see what happens when it's all over with. So after the Great Depression, to be able to help, the Democrat president basically created the New Deal programs. Basically what this was, and this was President Roosevelt, was he basically used federal government money to create jobs, to stimulate the economy, to give people money, to put money into banks, and to try to recover the economy. The Republican president before then, or basically the beginning of the Great Depression, said, I don't think government should put their hands in business. I think that business will take care of itself. We shouldn't be changing things with government. But the Democratic Party was the one who prevailed, and that's a Democratic notion today, even as well. Even though Republicans are in power, this still changed the shift of how powerful government is. With the New Deal is basically now, thanks to the New Deal, the government should intervene if the economy goes bad. Because before it was, well, they could not. Some people thought that they shouldn't. Now, for the most part, most people agree that the government should help when the economy is bad, so that people can make sure to live at least decent lives in times that are bad. So I want to talk to you guys about some key core values of the political parties. Okay, and these are super important. I'm going to put my Republican hat on right now. I'll do my disclosure to you guys. Oh, why is it purple? That I will not tell you guys what political party I have. I do have my own beliefs, but I will just put on hats as if I was a member of that political party to show you what they believe. It's going slow. There we go. Okay, so the Republicans, their core values or main beliefs and how they believe, this is the biggest distinction between Republicans and Democrats, is with Republicans, they believe in states' rights. They strongly believe more of what the anti-federalists believed when we talked about the Articles of Confederation. the Articles of Confederation, the states' rights, states' power was higher or more powerful than the federal government's power. The Republicans today, they want stronger state power. They want less federal power. They want less the federal government coming in and saying, we want you to do this. You have to do this. They don't like that at all. With coronavirus, since that's popular and going on right now, Republicans would say that if the president were to say, all you states, you have to make all your schools go online, or all of you states, you have to enforce, even in the areas, that have less transmissions or not as many cases, you still have to have no meetings and you have to have masks everywhere. And basically the federal government would tell the whole country what they have to do. And the Republicans would say, no, that's a state's right. The states should decide for themselves what the restrictions should be, what they want to do to help their people in their state. That's what Republicans would say. And this basically, for the most part, is the concept of federalism. They believe that there should be a strong distinction between what is federal government power and what is state government power. The more state government power they have, the less powerful the federal government is. Really a huge thing is limit this federal power. They don't like that. Also, one last thing that they have as their core beliefs is individual liberties. Liberties means freedoms. So they want people to make decisions for themselves. So for example, let's take these mask mandates. The reason why Republicans are so against that is because government is telling them how to live their life. If they could go to church or not, if they could, leave their house or not, if they could have parties, if they could have weddings. They are really rejecting, not because they don't care about people's health. They're rejecting it because they think that individually they should have the freedom to choose how they respond to this. They don't feel like government should be telling them, you have to do this. They feel like government should not say that at all. They should not be telling people what they have to do. Okay, that is the biggest reason that Republicans today are resenting and going against the restrictions right now. So next, we'll talk about the core Democratic values. And I'm just waiting for my thing to, it changed. That's because I changed my, let's see. Oh man. Let's see if I can change that again. Man, my Zoom is going really slow. Sorry, guys. Let's see if it'll change back to red. Super slow. Come on. Well. Okay. This is being weird. All right. I was trying to change that back to red because Republican Party is red. So it's going slow. So it's not really letting me. So we'll just keep going on, as soon as, okay, there we go. All right. So the Democrats on the other side, the Democrats, their core values are social equality, meaning within day-to-day lives in society, people should be equal. No matter who they are, what they are, people should be equal and be treated equally. That is, the part of the humanity that Democrats, I'm going to put on my Democrat hat now. part of the humanity that the Democrats have is that is the most important thing to them is equality. People should be equal no matter who they are, what they are. Next one is government. Wow. I can't even see. There we go. Government responsibility, meaning that the government has a responsibility to basically tell us or make sure that we are safe, make sure we are happy and healthy. It's their responsibility to make sure we have things that we need. Healthcare, for instance, because they believe it is something that everybody should have access to healthcare and help when it comes to issues with their health. They feel like it's the government's responsibility to take care of their own people. In the preamble of the Constitution, it does state that the government is responsible for the welfare of the citizens. Welfare means basically their well-being, which includes health. And that's why they're so adamant about having health care for everyone, because they believe that it's something that the government has a duty to, or responsibility to make sure that other people have. And that's not just with healthcare, but that's everything. Whenever there's men and women who are treated differently, or different races who are treated differently, it's the government's responsibility to make sure that people are not treated differently. So the Republicans over here, they're more for individually you should take care of, make sure that you treat everybody the same. The Democrats, they're like, well, if people individually were able to do that, then there wouldn't be, any hatred in the world, no discrimination in the world, but there is, because people individually cannot withhold their biases and their judgment and their stereotypes. So what they do is they say, well, government has got to be the only answer because people aren't going to do themselves. So we had to have the government responsible for making sure that people are treated equally. And then lastly, individual rights. So that's why they support more of the civil rights movements, is because they support people's oh, I spelled it wrong. I can't tell my thing goes so slow. Pops up, the letters pop up like 2 seconds after I type it. So I couldn't tell if I missed any letters. So they're more so for individual rights, making sure that people have the rights that they need, that everybody needs. And I wish I could share that with you as well as see you guys. Let's talk about discussions between these two. Okay, thanks, Joy. I saw your chat. Let's talk about the differences. Let's see. Try to think of what to talk about first. Oh, our class is almost over. Okay, so some main takeaways for today is, first, as we saw in the videos, political parties, they change over time. They're not going to stay the same. Their values today are going to be completely different within the next 100 years. That's just how things work. They change, things evolve. The world evolves, society evolves, and so political parties evolve. It's not going to look the same in 100 years. Another thing is, when I was talking about the differences between Republicans and Democrats, let's think back to one of our court cases that we've talked about before, Brown v. Board of Education, meaning getting rid of segregation in schools. That's one that you guys hopefully should remember from a few weeks ago. At the beginning, the Supreme Court was divided on how to resolve this. That's because half of them, the Democratic half, they believe that, yeah, people shouldn't be separated. That's violating their individual rights, and that's not equality. So of course we need to make sure to make people not be segregated anymore. That goes back to, again, their individual civil rights that they support so heavily. The Republicans, on the other hand, they weren't focusing on whether it was right or not to segregate. They were focusing on whether the federal government had the power to decide these cases, to decide whether schools should segregate or not. They felt like the federal government did not have that power. So Oh, my Zoom is now going weird, so I can't go back to my list. And that's the biggest thing. When political parties when these two parties are discussing with each other, usually they focus on one little part of the issue. So given the Brown v. Board of Education issue on whether segregation should, I'm kind of blanking, so just keep listening. If they were to talk specifically on should segregation be legal or not, most people would say, no, it shouldn't be legal. Segregation is not okay. But that's a whole separate issue from should the federal government have the power to tell states to desegregate? Or is that a state power? That's a whole different thing. Okay. Two different parts of that issue. And if you pay attention to how Democrats and Republicans communicate and how they discuss, you'll see that a lot. They talk about one issue like immigration, but they'll focus on two different parts. Republicans focus on what the law allows, and Democrats will focus on what is humane or not. Those are two different parts of the same issue, but the problem is they can't ever agree because they don't ever talk about the same part. We will be done with this today. We'll continue this tomorrow, going into talking about some of the third parties and the core beliefs and values of the Republican Democrat parties. So go ahead and take off. I can't end my Zoom meeting right now, so go ahead and, maybe I can now. We'll finish this tomorrow, okay? See you guys tomorrow.